Well, in a typical Angular app, directives kind of encapsulate most of the DOM manipulations, right? And I mean, DOM manipulations is usually the source of troubles, especially when it comes to all the inconsistencies in between browsers. So I think that's kind of another reason why we really should test these things. But unfortunately, very often people think like, it touches DOM, so it's kind of difficult to test, so I'm not gonna touch it. And so now I would like to do a quick demo to show you how you can actually test directives and give you some ideas how to do that. So I decided to take the example from Angular homepage, which is this simple directive. It's a Twitter Bootstrap tabs component. So it works like this. It's copy-pasted from Angular homepage, so I guess you know it. This is the source code. That's index.html. So you can see we are using tabs, right? And that's the directive. That's the Angular directive. So that allows us to use tabs and panes. Okay? And the source code of this directive is actually right over there, here. You know, it's very similar to stuff that Michko just talked about. Okay, and so the question is, how can we test such a directive, right? Well, let me make this. I wrote a couple of unit tests that I'm gonna show you, and I will try to explain how can you do that. So first thing I'm doing in this unit test is I'm asking for a compile, which is this guy, $compile, which is Angular compiler, right? You already saw that. And what you can do, you can actually create a DOM. You can, like, that's what I'm doing here. Yes?
Where does the compile come from?
Compiler, you just get it. You get it from dependency injection.
Can you show me? You can't see it. Maybe your
you have a slightly different screen than I'm sorry. Good point. How about this?
There you go.
So I might say this is Jasmine. The syntax of this unit test is a Jasmine. And for those who are not familiar with that, Angular gives you some helper function to actually use dependency injection during unit testing as well, right? So that's why you can use this inject method to actually get stuff injected in the same way as in your app. So here we are just saying, hey, I want to compile, and injector will give you Angular's compiler, okay? And then we create an element, like DOM element basically, which is, it's one div, and there's this tabs, and there are two panes inside. There's one pane with title first tab, and another pane with title second tab. And then what we do, we actually do sort of manual bootstrap. It's very similar to manual bootstrapping the app, because we take this element and we pass it to compiler and say, hey, compile this element. And that means, so this line number 25, that's kind of important piece, because that's where the compiler actually traverses this chunk of DOM and it applies all the directives and basically transform the DOM, right? So that's how we kind of apply this directive, this component, and then we can just assert whether the result is what we expected, right? So here, for instance, I'm testing whether it creates the titles, whether it creates the clickable titles. Like, if we look into this example, there are two tabs, these tabs that you can click. So in this unit test, we are testing whether it creates these things, right? Because the input is just tabs, and there are two panes, and it needs to create like different structure, the structure with divs and unordered lists. So we are double checking that this happens. Then I'm testing whether the binding inside the tab works, right? So again, we do the same thing, and then we assert what is the content of the tab, and we assert whether the content is what you expect. So if I go up, you can see the content of the first pane is first content is and binding to first variable. And then inside this test, what I'm doing, I'm just setting this variable to value 1, 2, 3, and then I'm asserting that the content of the tab is properly bound. Right? There's a bunch of other unit tests, like testing whether the active CSS class is properly applied and stuff. I think the most interesting test is the last one, and that kind of pretends clicking a link. Right? And you can do that easily, like with just jQuery, right? So what I'm doing here, again, first we apply this directive, and then I'm doing, hey, find the second link and trigger click, right? So basically this test, what this test does, it just finds this second link and it triggers click. And then we assert whether the second title has the class active, right? That's right here. And we assert that the second content has class active, because that's what makes these tabs either visible or hidden, right? And these are pretty much like unit tests that covers the basic functionality of this component. Let me show you how you can run these things. So we use something we call Testacular. Just, I don't know, are you guys familiar with this thing, with Testacular? It's a test runner that we did to make our life a little bit easier. And what it does, it bootstrap, well, it keeps watching your file system, the files of your project. And whenever you change any of those files, it executes these unit tests in a real browser. So let me show how this works. So I'm gonna start Testacular, and it's kind of small screen, but you can see that it captured Chrome in the background, and now it's gonna, whenever I change any of those files, it will execute these tests in this Chrome. You can use any other browser if you like. And it keeps watching these files. So you can see if I change something in this file and I press save, it immediately executes these unit tests. And you can immediately see the results in your console, or you can do that even in IDE, like if you're using WebStorm or something.
Sorry, how did it know captured this file? Was it command line argument?
No, there's like configuration file for this project. Sorry, the question, you want me to repeat the question? The question was, how does this thing know which file to watch? And the answer is that there is a configuration file per project where you specify a list of files that you want to watch. I can show you this config file if you want. The interesting part is here, where we say, hey, watch all the JavaScript files in JS folder, basically. And all right, so this is how you run these tests, and you can see that they are still, even though you do some little bit of DOM manipulation, it's still pretty fast. Let me show you that it's really what I'm saying. Let's fail some of these
How
tests.
do you figure they're fast?
Say again?
You said they're fast. How fast are they?
I mean, when it comes to these 5 unit tests, it's kind of useless numbers, but now it's 200 milliseconds. It used to be faster. Now it's 100. It depends on the network as well, but it's about 100 or 200 milliseconds, these 5 unit tests. And I think, and here's one tip that I have for you, and that's whenever you are doing this, whenever you're testing directives, and basically whenever you're testing DOM, if it's possible, don't attach this DOM to the document. You can see here, we create this Angular element, that's just a wrapper around jQuery, right? So it basically creates a DOM from this string. And you can see we are passing this to compiler and doing these, like applying all these directives, but we don't attach this this DOM into a document, right? And that means that the browser doesn't have to render it. So it's way faster, right? So unless you really need it, don't attach this stuff to the document. That will help you load. I mean, sometimes there is no way around. Sometimes you need it to attach to the DOM. For instance, if the directive needs, like for instance, know the size of the div, to get this computed sizes, you need to attach it to a document to render it so that you actually know how big it is. But unless you really need it, don't do it. Yeah, so let me try to fail some of these tests. So for instance, let's check. This is the template of this tabs. So, and here we are saying there is active class. So let's, for instance, change this. And when I save it, you can see that it immediately executes this test, and they fail because there is a test that tests whether the active CSS class is applied properly, and it complains that this element should have CSS class active, but it does not now, right? Because I broke the component. Like if I go now to the page and refresh, you can see it doesn't work. Well, it does, but
It doesn't display.
yeah, but yeah, because I removed it only from the titles. So the titles are, you can see the titles looks both the same. There is none of them is active, so it's actually broken. Cool. All right, let me show you one more trick that can make your unit tests and tests of these DOM stuff and directives a little bit faster. I think it's always good to cover either functionality or bugs with as low as possible test. So these cases that I just show you, they are not really unit tests. Like they are a little bit higher level tests, right? We are doing DOM manipulation. There are multiple components involved in these tests. So what you can do, if you look into these tabs directive, it has its own controller, for instance. And Mishka didn't talk about controllers, but controller is very similar to linking function. So for now, we can say it's a linking function. It's almost the same. So this controller contains a little bit of logic for this particular component, right? There's like select method and add pane. And it turns out that you could possibly test this controller even without DOM, right? Because even inside this component, this tabs component, you have this sort of separation between logic and view. So you could extract this controller. Let me do that. We can take out this function and say tabs controller and just define it as a function here. Something like this. And now what I can do, I can test this controller separately without the DOM, right? And that again makes it faster. So in this case, I think we covered pretty much all the behavior, all the functionality of this controller in the previous unit test already, where we test the component as a whole. But if I have this sort of like framework, like extracting this, let me say it differently. If I have this like controller extracted outside from the directive, and I have set up unit test for this controller, it's really easy to add more tests for that. So, for instance, if I found a bug in this controller later on, it is super easy for me to add a new test that covers just this bug without doing all the stuff with DOM. I don't feel I'm explaining this well. But the point is that if it's possible, and with directives, it could be possible for controllers or linking functions, you might extract these linking functions or controllers out of the directive so that you can test them separately without DOM. And that, again, can make it faster. All right. Any questions? No? Last thing I want to show you. If you look into this controller, into this component, there is this template that is kind of inlined in JavaScript, and it looks kind of nasty. It's like a string in a JavaScript. We don't like that. So I think it's way better to use external template, like to have the template extracted to a separate file. And we can do that, like with Angular, the directive you can use, instead of template, you can use template URL, like this, and then it will fetch the template from an external file. So I can do that, and I can do that for this other guy as well. And you can see that it still works the same. The only difference is that now we are loading, is it visible? We are loading these two templates as a separate files, right? That's good because you get all this stuff like, you know, in IDE you have syntax highlighting for HTML, and it's way nicer and easier to read and refactor. But the trouble is that when it comes to this test, the trouble is, how do you get this template to testing? Because we are loading just JavaScript files and we just execute them. And so you would have to, I mean, if I execute these tests, this is super small. Maybe I can. You would basically need another web server to serve these templates just for unit testing. Right, and that's something you don't want to deal with. Like, it's just unit testing. You want it to be fast. So we have this new feature for Testacular that it can watch HTML files as well. And whenever you change any of those files, it converts those files on the fly into JavaScript files. That eventually puts this content into template cache. It's kind of like a little bit trick, but I think I will show you the generated content that should explain. Okay, so what is this?
Exactly.
No, that should be already.
You did your breaking.
Yeah, but now I'm not using the. But I don't think I changed the HTML file. Oops. Yeah, this is correct. All right, I know. I need to load this module. All right, I'm sorry, it's so small. Anyway, so the tests are now passing, and let me show you what's actually being loaded. This is the browser that we are executing these tests in background. You know, that's the captured browser that Testacular actually sends to, like, whenever you change the file, it says, hey, Testacular, these are the new files, execute them and test them. And let me show you the network panel here. Now if I execute the test again, you can see that it loads these suspicious files. It loads tabs.html.js, and that's the generated file. So it on the fly, it creates this generated JavaScript file, and maybe I can make it bigger. And you can see that this JavaScript file is just it just creates Angular module, and it puts the string, which is the template from the HTML file, it puts it into a template cache. So that then, when the directive actually asks for a template, it doesn't fetch it from server, but it takes it from local cache. So that enables you to test directives with external files, with external templates, without any overhead, because it keeps watching the HTML files in the same way as JavaScript files. So if I open, this is the external template, right? That's the template for tabs. And if I save this file, if I change this file and I save it, the Stacular will notice that as well, and it will execute all the tests again, like this. And still like 200 milliseconds or something. All right. I don't think this was good explanation, but I mean, I don't know. Do you have any questions? This whole thing is I will put it on GitHub, so you can actually, once your brain is fresh, you can see it again, and maybe I hope it might give you some ideas how to test directives, because I really believe that we should test them, and it's not that difficult once we figure out how. Sorry, question?
So is the Stacular documentation linked from Angular's website? Where do you find it?
The Stacular documentation?
No, okay.
Okay. No. I think that's definitely a T-shirt question. No, there is a README, and there is actually a screencast. I did a screencast how to
So Testacular is a project that is separate from Angular. We use it for all of the testing, but you can actually use it even without Angular. So if you're building an application that needs to run tests in a browser, then you can use Testacular for that if you're using just jQuery or some other framework.
Yeah.
I noticed you have this AngularJS tab in Web Inspector. Actually, Mishka had it, you also. So where can I get one of those?
That's a good question. That's an extension that Brian Ford did, our intern, and it's called Batarang.
How do you spell
Batarang. Was that correct?
Yeah, it's in the Chrome store, so you can download them from there.
Yep. Do you need Canary or?
No, you can
Awesome.
just-
It already works in stable Chrome.
Yeah, it works in stable Chrome.
Awesome. Yep.
Any other questions? One more?
Which version of Testacular support template? Do I need to worry about version of Testacular?
Version of Testacular. Which version of Testacular?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I didn't mention that. Yeah, this feature was implemented this afternoon for the purpose of this talk. So it's not, but you can have it if you install it through if you use a Canary like channel. So if you do npm install Testacular at Canary.
We'll post it to the meetup group. So on meetup.com, there's going to be a comment about this, and there are going to be instructions. One more question?
to do like end-to-end tests, like seed, then test?
Is there a way to do end-to-end testing with Testacular?
Yes, there is. I think the best example is Angular Seed or Angular Tutorial. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is it updated?
The tutorial currently still uses JS driver, but it's the same thing. So.
But the Angular Seed
Yeah.
is updated.
Yeah.
Okay, so Angular Seed, it's a repo on our GitHub.
I'll post a note to the meetup
Yes.
page.
And that's kind of all configured and set up how to use Angular Scenario Runner with Testacular.
Is there any ability to profile which character is slow in terms of responses in the test cases? Or?
Is there a way to profile directives and figure out what is slow in my application?
Okay.
Batarang.
We don't have anything specific for directives. I mean,
Well,
how can be directive? Like directive on its own, I don't think directive can be.
In case of nested issues or any complications, right? You don't know whether it's good.
I think Batarang is this extension is probably the best
Batarang
thing
is the
for
best way.
debugging.
It's going to show you which parts of the application are slow.
Yes.
And typically the slowness of the application comes from things that Batarang currently displays. So
It's usually about binding, and Batarang will show you all the bindings, and so most of the time the directive will have a couple of bindings, and these bindings might be slow.
one last question. Is there one? Okay, one more.
Is the template cache code on GitHub as well?
Template cache. Template cache is part of Angular.
Yes.
It's a service that you can interact with. If you look at the documentation, you'll find it. And just Testacular and this plugin for Testacular uses just this template cache to populate the cache for the tests.
Can you use it as an optimization?
Yeah. Yeah, so many of the big applications actually use the external templates, and during the deploy process or during the build process, they will just concatenate all the templates from these external files into a single JavaScript file that populates the cache, and then this single JavaScript file is loaded when the application is deployed in production.
Or you can inline stuff into a script tag, and that eventually will be done through template cache as well. Because if you inline template in a script tag, then Angular will read it and put it into template
Script
cache.
tag with the type text /ng template.